National Signing Day. So to get you ready for what's going to happen with the Nittany Lions on the traditional signing day, recruiting insider Ryan Snyder, almost called him Brian. It's been a long day. Ryan Snyder is joining us on the show to answer your questions. So once again, you and Ryan are the star of the BWI Daily Edition. Let's get to it. Hey, there's Brian. How you doing tonight?
Hey there, Tyler. How are you?
One of us is having a beer, and it's not me, but you wouldn't know it.
Well, last
What are we
time I
drinking
came on
tonight?
the live show, just a cold snap, a good old Sam Adams. But
Perfect.
last time I came on, people were asking where my beer was, so or something about drinking. I remember, so I was like, hey, 2 weeks later, let's bring one down. Actually,
Yeah.
if I'm being honest, if we're gonna be here a little while, I brought two, so let's roll.
The other day, I had some rum on the show after I recorded 3 podcasts in one day. I'm like, I don't care. Like, we're doing this. So,
Get it.
Sam Adams, Big Spring Spirits, I don't care. Anyone could be a sponsor of the live show if they want to be. And that really is what brings us to what we're talking about tonight. It's what you want to know. National Signing Day, we're going to take one last look back again at the class of 2023. Some interesting things I don't think we've covered. I have some prepared thoughts. I have some prepared things to talk about. But what do you want to know? You got a question for Ryan. Is it a recruiting question about 23, 24? We're going to be talking about that tonight. I love this already, and it's getting applause in the chat. Jason says, is it oh no or oh yeah? Which, of course, is where we're starting today. Is with Chimdy Onoh, Penn State's target for this signing period, once again going after an offensive lineman. Ryan, what are we talking about here?
Certainly seems to be trending Penn State's way. I've seen so many national signing day surprises over the year that I'm hesitant to say, yeah, it's a done deal or anything like that. But Penn State has a few things going for them. I think the relationship with Trautwein was really important. Trout's done a great job. We'll talk about Trout, I'm sure, later here, but he's obviously done a great job on the recruiting trail of late. I think the proximity, Dundalk's right outside of Baltimore. I think that's how to handle it. He's a really bright kid. I don't even want to call him a kid. He's 6'5", so a really bright young man, we'll say. Told me he wants to potentially major in, I think it was mechanical engineering or business. 2 great schools for Penn State, obviously, as any alum knows. So I think a few things there really stacked up in Penn State's favor. I think Michigan State and Rutgers, I don't want to say they're absolutely out of it because I've seen too many signing day surprises to put this in pen, I guess you'd say. But multiple colleagues have put in picks. I didn't put in a pick just because Sean did put in a pick today. I try not to overlap and just overdo it. I think if people see one of us putting in picks, it's pretty much we're both on the same board. So I expect Chimney to be a Nittany Lion tomorrow, but we will see. He's got one more night to sleep on it.
You said 6'5". Is he give us the measurables for people who are learning just now about Chimdy Onoh and why Penn State's going after him?
Yeah, 6'5" is a legit number. 270 is all a legit number. We updated those after catching up with some people following his official visit. I believe the reach was around 34, which is pretty much what you see with most. Yeah. Penn State really wants their guys to have a 34-inch reach. Hands that are 9+, something like that. Yeah, I think he was over the 9. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I remember 34-inch reach was certainly one. 6'5", 270, as I said. Of course, Chimney really good in track and field as well. I think Javen Williams has gotten a lot of credit for his shot put and discus numbers. Chimney's not far behind him. He had a 61.4 in shot put this past year, 175 in the discus. To carry to Javen, I think Javen had like a 66.7 and 189 in discus. So, that's part of the reason why Javen got that 5-star rating is not just what you see on the field, but obviously what you get from track and field. Obviously, lower body explosion, that plays a big part in it. And those numbers for Chimney are a big reason why he joined the On 300 before it was all said and done. I think the consensus has him at 207 and On 3 has him at 210. So pretty similar numbers there as far as the rating goes.
Yeah, and one thing that we've talked about, and of course, if you want to follow Blue White Illustrated here on YouTube, we'll have breaking news if it breaks for Penn State. We'll also have coverage tomorrow of National Signing Day, so subscribe to Blue White Illustrated. Like the video if you hear. I know that there's the people are just shuffling in right now. Ryan, this is kind of the orchestra's warming up. They're dimming the house lights. People are still getting here. So catch what Ryan just talked about on replay, but also please like the video. Helps everybody know that this is a show worth turning into. And Steven's here, as always. Love Steven. Great night. He says, walking the dog and listening to my favorite podcast. Love the fact that you're streaming us on YouTube while walking the dog. Somebody does not fear data limits. I love a man who's brave like that. And if you want to donate to the channel, you want to get your question here on the show, we will automatically talk to people, and we will answer the questions of people who give a donate, like Steven with a super chat. But, of course, we're talking to everybody in the chat tonight. Really raw, I think, is the way you describe Chimdy Onoh. Tackle, and that addresses some of the things in the class that we can get to in a second. But in terms of guys that are going to contribute early, he's not on my list. Obviously, not going to be an early enrollee, but also from a play perspective, there's some things that he really does need to clean up before he's a finished product, as they all do. But also physically and technically, there's a ways to go for him. Where do you place him? I guess in your projection cycle, quality prospect. Kind of if Penn State gets Onoh, what are they getting in your mind?
Certainly seems to be a true tackle from everything I've gathered from just talking to people. I mean, I think that's where they plan to start him out. I would put him similar boat to Anthony Donko. There's certainly things he can improve on, but I can say the same thing about Alex Birchmeier and Javen Williams too. I mean, we can look at highlights and find all these things to break down or pick apart. But they're high school offensive linemen. I mean, they're going to get to the Big Ten. They're going to get that coaching. Right. They're going to get that spring ball and all those little things that add up. There's no offensive lineman out there that's perfect. So I think you got the body size, you got the athleticism. One thing with Chimney that really kind of stands out to me is he seems to be a really intelligent player. That's really what people speak highly of him. Charles speaks highly of him with that. Mm-hmm. His coach, Tom Abel, speaks highly of that. I caught up with Tom not that long ago to get his thoughts. Seems to be good reading. With different concepts. He seems to be a fast learner, obviously very physically gifted. But to me, he's a similar boat to Donko. I think Javen has that high ceiling, right? That everybody. Yeah. That's why he gets that 5-star rating. I think Birchmeier is certainly the one from a technique perspective that's the most ready to go. But I can look at Chimney and I can look at Anthony Donko and say, man, you give these guys a year with Phil Trautwein. And I don't want to say the sky's the limit, but the sky's the limit in a lot of different ways. So we're going to get into. I think we're going to get into Trout and just what he's done. And I want to push the fact that we're breaking down all 4-star offensive linemen here. There's
yeah.
I mean, we'll get into it a little bit more, but I mean, we're trying to break down guys where a few years ago Penn State would done anything to have a class with four-star offensive linemen.
We were talking about guys, and I remember doing profiles on guys that I'm like, well, yeah, he's got tackle length, but he really struggles with laundry list of things that make you uncomfortable about his projection in the next level. And with Chimdy Onoh, and you mentioned Donko, and I think you make a great point about kind of similar projection arcs. Both those guys have all the tools you need. They have what it takes to be good offensive linemen. And I put this up here earlier, but the senior beardsman on the podcast, Michael McCullen, he's back with a donation. He says, if Onoh hits, how big is it for the Penn State offensive line? I think you just kind of answered that, but a bona fide tackle, right? So that's what we're talking about. If he hits, that allows the flexibility of this group to really shine, which is what they were missing before, was a true tackle that they want to start there, and then that gives the flexibility for Birchmeier, Williams, Donko, all those guys to play where they best fit. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd say is, Birchmeier and Javen are both expected to start at tackle too. So I want to obviously, like from our last time having formal discussions with James Franklin, at least in his last recruiting press conference, that's what James expected them to do. So how does Chimney impact that? Time will tell, but just from my discussions with people over the span of, and this has been such a fast recruitment too, so I don't want to act like I'm a Chimdy Onoh expert, because this was like a 6-week recruitment basically. He's been offered a little bit longer than that, but really from a little bit before Christmas time is where this one really took off. So a lot to learn there, but most people seem to think the tackle's his best spot long term, but you can say the same about a lot of guys. The last thing I'll just stress is Penn State's always trying to find guys that can play multiple positions. Like every year I ask James Franklin the same question, and every year he answers it the same way. We want offensive linemen that can play inside, outside. I mean, and I get the same quote every year. I don't even know why I ask. I should just repeat from the year before, because I know what's coming, and I respect it too. And he's answering it truthfully. There's just always a bulk of offensive linemen in every class, so you have to get some sort of an offensive line question out of him when you're doing those press conferences.
So this is kind of the conversation we had the other day. I think it was on Breaking News, or it was somewhere else, talking about Jalen Matthews. And the one comment I have about a guy that's tall and that plays, and if he doesn't work out at tackle and he's a very tall player, it's hard to then find another place for him. Not to point to guys on the roster, but there are guys on the roster that can only play, in my opinion, tackle. And if they don't make a splash at that position, they get passed up. Then it becomes, well, everyone just thinks it's easy to move inside to guard. And if you don't have the pad level to play inside, you don't have the pad level to play inside. You're going to get reached. You're going to get all of these problems are going to come up, maybe worse because of your size on the interior. So having a guy like Alex Birchmeier that could possibly play 4 and/or 5 positions, it gives you the bust rate. It lowers that. Like, there's a reason. It's not just that they want to have guys that can play any position for injury or whatever. Like, it gives you the opportunity to play guys wherever. And if they project differently than when you thought originally, margin for error. How about that? James Franklin always loves talking about the margin for error, right?
The one thing I'd add is, like, Jalen Matthews is absolutely, like, he's that guy. He's a tackle.
Yep.
I think all these other guys are versatile. Jalen's absolutely, with his size, with his reach and all those things, he's certainly going to be a tackle. But he's 2025, so we'll be talking about him a lot, I guess, over the next couple of years. But he won't be here, obviously, for almost 2 years, too.
And he could evolve into anything. Like, he's so young. But it's just one of those things, I think, that from a football philosophy standpoint, I find interesting when we have these conversations.
I can't imagine him adding 2 more inches, Jalen. I think he's maxed out, but who knows? We'll see.
I'm not maxed out on my appreciation for awkward transitions, which is what I'm doing right now. We're talking about Rogue Shop. RogueShop.com, the official sponsor of the Blue White Illustrated Daily Edition live show. If you want to get some of the best, most professional small batch cannabis farmers who specialize in sustainable plant medicine, check out Rogue Shop. And this is what you need to do first off, is use the promo code BWI for 10% off, so they know you're coming from us, and so you get a little bit off on your purchase. But they got a bunch of great stuff that can help you out. I have not slept in 3 days for some reason. Just slept like garbage. So tonight, I'm going to open up the bottle of the THC and the gummies that I take, the Delta 9 THCs, and I'm actually going to sleep for the first time in a couple of days. Because for some reason, my body's like, no, I know you got this whole thing you're doing of working, but no, you're not gonna fall asleep tonight. So if you have issues like that, or if you have issues with chronic pain or chronic inflammation or any of these things that reduce the quality of your life and cause damage to your body in a long-term sense, holistic medicine, when combined with proper treatment, is a great way to heal your body and make sure you live a long, full, happy life. And believe it or not, that is something that I think we all should strive for, is to live a long, full, happy life. So RogueShop.com, use promo code BWI for 10% off, and help support the premier sponsor of the BWI Daily Edition, and that's Rogue Shop. That and my awesome colleagues who are always here on the show helping me out with bringing you guys great information and great content. We mentioned we were going to talk about Phil Trautwein. With all of this conversation about offensive linemen, damn, dude, he's on a roll. Ryan, you were talking about this the other day as far as noticing a trend that he says. So can you lay out what you were thinking about the other day?
Yeah, we're talking about 6 straight 4-star on 300 players, and one of whom is a 5-star. When you include Cooper, when you include Jalen, and you include these 4 young men, if Chimdy gets here, excuse me, I don't want to come off as if he's not, but if Chimdy is here, which I do expect him to be, you're talking about 6 4-star guys, one of whom is a 5-star. I mean, I was looking back, so the other, I think last night, I was just curious, like, what did Ohio State bring in? What did Alabama bring in? What did Georgia bring in? They all brought in 3-star guys along the offensive line. I think Alabama or Georgia, one of those two signed multiple 3-star guys. So when you're stacking up an offensive line class across the country, I didn't look at all those schools. There's a lot of them out there, but I'd be hard pressed to find one that's probably going to be better than this when you add Chimdy, who, of course, like I said, is an on 300 guy and 203. So as long as they get that over the line tomorrow, I think they're going to. Again, he's got a whole night to sleep on it, and in the NIL world, who knows what'll happen some days. But I expect him to be a Nittany Lion. It seems to be certainly going that way. And hey, man, six 4-star players, one of whom's a 5-star. I don't know how any fan out there, when you also add in the progression you saw on the field this year, Fashanu's on pace to be, who knows? I mean, certainly I think a first-round guy, but maybe even a top 15, top 10 guy. Who knows after this upcoming year? I don't know how any fan could be still concerned about that position. I mean, look. I mean, one last thing I'll say, like when you think of Penn State, right? You think of running backs, you think of tight end, you think maybe cornerbacks now. What am I missing? Oh, linebacker, of course. I'd skip over the easy one. You think of linebacker, you think of tight end, you think of running back. There's a long way to go until you start thinking about offensive line as a premier position, but you're bringing in the talent, and we saw the development here from a couple guys this year that's thinking, oh man, maybe this is going to turn into a strength here over the back half of this decade.
So the funny thing is, like, you don't notice it until you don't have it, and then when you don't have it for a decade, then you really notice the offensive line. It's one of those things that makes everything easier, right? And you don't, because you think of it either as a group or just when they mess up, and there's some sort of problem with the offense. But 5 individuals up front make up almost half of the offense. And if you can have half of your offense be a strength, this is what I was talking about, kind of my issue talking about offensive lines when we get to the college level, is when you break it down and you watch every play, somebody's making a mistake somewhere along the line. And you look at some of the players, and some of them have deficiencies, and some of them aren't good at X, Y, or Z. And it's like, well, if you could force this group to do this, they're not going to play as well. But when you have fewer issues there, you can just do more. Penn State, like, you want to throw the ball deep? You've got 2 good tackles? Throw the ball deep. Find out. Let's find out. It all starts up front, but you can't have one-sided anything on any team, I think is a fair place to put that.
Oh, we're going to find out about them throwing deep this year, buddy. Don't worry about that.
I was just watching Drew Aller. I was just watching Drew Aller highlights on Twitter from his quarterback coach in front of the show, Brad Mandler. So yeah, he's looking pretty good. We'll have to see what happens when they throw cover 0 at him, because that's what everyone likes to do now. Lee, this is an interesting thing. Ryan, Lee says, yes, Phil Trautwein kicking butt. He changed my opinion on him. Hope we can keep him.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Like, the minute something, like, there's a psychology to this, to me, of like, the minute something goes well, then it becomes the fear of losing it, but also it's a reality in college football. How do you ride that line when you're watching a guy have success at a program, compared to then kind of this idea of now you're going to lose him? Like, is Penn State still in that position, I guess, is the question. Is he in line to be an OC or something like that?
I'm sure. I mean, look, if you get... I don't see Trout as an OC or anything like that. This is what I would say. Remember that last contract when everybody was mad at James, playing the game. The game's the wrong way to say it, but flirting with other schools, whatever it may be. Like, James has done this multiple times. He knows what his program needs to take that next step. If you paid attention to the site this week, they've added Deion Barnes, obviously. They've added a new recruiting coordinator. Like, my point with all this is money seems to be there now. Is it Georgia money? Is it Alabama money? Is it Ohio State money? Probably not to that level yet. But has certainly been an influx of money when it comes to staff retention, staff's additions. I mean, I still expect to see more recruiting additions. I know they're still trying to add more recruiting staff. And when you compare it to Georgia and some other schools, I mean, Penn State, I think from a recruiting perspective, I know this is a little off topic, but I think they're still around 14, 15. Well, they're maybe a little bit over that now. You're still playing from behind with those elite programs that you're trying to catch, that Penn State fans are comparing you to. I mean, I think Georgia's recruiting staff's up to nearly 25 or something like that now. So my point with all this is just the money's there now. So if, say... Maybe if a Florida, obviously he played at Florida, came after him, and they can match the money, then certainly I think he'd have something to think about. But when you're at Penn State and the money's there, clearly the money's there to match other offers. There aren't too many other schools that you absolutely have to take, right? I mean, maybe the school you played at, you got a handful, maybe 6, 7, 8 schools that are probably on a different tier than Penn State right now. But hey, man, we're we're talking about a Rose Bowl champs here. I know, obviously, they got in the Rose Bowl because of the other 2 teams in the Big Ten made the playoff, but it's not like things are too bad right now compared to this to a year ago. I think that there was more reason for that, but obviously, with those recruiting successes come expectations and come the attention of other people. So do I see Phil leaving? No, I don't. I think he's proven himself and his family. Remember, Phil, I think Phil has a good chunk of kids too. I think he's got a handful of them. They seem to be getting comfortable here at State College. So, but we'll see. Who knows, man? As I say this, someone's going to point to this someday when Phil leaves in 7, 8 months from now or whatever it is. But my point is the money's there, guys. So it seems to be a little bit of a different story now.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I wanted to dig into. There are certain guys that I would say are on the path to maybe being a head coach or being a defensive coordinator or something like that. Anthony Poindexter is already interviewed for head coaching positions. Manny Diaz has been a head coach. And I'm not saying that Phil Trautwein isn't one of those. He's not that caliber of coach. It makes it sound like I'm saying he's not as good of a coach as those guys. But it's just like offensive line coaches, I just feel like are kind of different. And he's doing an excellent job at a great university that has respect and prestige, and he's having the success he wants, at least on the recruiting trail so far, at Penn State. So it's just it's a very interesting situation when you've got certain guys that you don't want to lose. Kreiner had a question here. Actually, he didn't have a question. He had a question.
Oh, I saw this one.
I wanted to get to this one.
Oh no, but never. I saw this last one earlier, and I was like, oh boy, this one could get bad.
Do you want to answer his first question, or are we leaving that in the chat?
I mean, Kreiner, what I would say.
Hold on.
I don't want to get in trouble.
Okay. All right.
I would say with Daniel Harris. Well, I'll answer a little Daniel Harris a little bit more. I mean, there were certainly.
Hold up. For our podcast audience, we have to set this up because this is here in the chat. He says, are there any wild recruiting stories from this cycle that you can share? I know Daniel Harris was a Penn State and Georgia lock going back and forth about 10 times. So that's what we've got going on in the chat. What now say your piece about what you don't and do want to say here.
I wish I could open up more. Someday we will open up about this one a little bit more because there are some interest. This was certainly the recruitment this year that was, if you're the Penn State coaching staff, the most frustrating. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind that Daniel Harris's mother and Daniel were telling Penn State they wanted to come. His father, I think, cared more about NIL and got in with Georgia a little bit more, and then NIL, and I don't know if they've offered him more or anything like that. I can't speak to that kind of stuff, but what was frustrating in Penn State's perspective was they had him. I mean, he decommitted. He said different reasons why he decommitted. He decommitted because I think he wanted to come to Penn State, to be flat out. And then kind of his dad got a little bit more involved, and that's where things were going back and forth and back and forth. And I think NIL had a massive hand in that one in the end. So when you're Penn State and you do the work to get a guy from Georgia, who, by the way, was committed to a school who already plucked multiple of your players. So, like,
yep.
they were absolutely trying to pluck guys from Georgia this year. I mean, there's no doubt about that in my mind. They were aiming to try and get back at them. They had them. They had them where they wanted to, but when you can't get your whole family to kind of on board with that situation, it makes things a little bit more difficult. So I do think NIL had a big part in that. Georgia's on a different level. All those SEC schools are playing a different game right now than what Penn State, not just Penn State, but Ohio State and Michigan too. I mean, Michigan State is the only Big Ten team right now who's playing the SEC game, which is, tell us what your number is. We'll see what we can get back. Yeah. Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State are more, hey, this is what we got for you. We're not just throwing crazy money around. Now, granted, quarterback might be a little bit different. Not saying at Penn State, but just at many schools. Yeah. But for most others, it's kind of this is what we have to offer. We're down the SEC. It's give me your number. I'll get back to you in 48 hours.
So this brings up a point you made earlier about recruiting staffs, and I was just, how did Georgia find out about Yazid Haynes so quickly? And
Yazid visited
Josh Miller.
Yazid was interested. Yazid went down there first, so they had their eye on him a little bit. I don't know a whole enough about like the lead up, but like obviously he goes to Penn State. He puts up impressive performances there. Whether they got more information or not, he does camp there. Then they got the same information that Penn State had, and that had a big hand in it. But they were showing interest in Yazid. Honestly, I don't want to talk down on Yazid, but I never felt like Yazid was a massive miss for them, just because I don't think Yazid's hands were that great, and I feel bad poorly talking about any kid, but he had some great numbers and stuff, but I don't know if he's a natural wide receiver. I'll leave it at that. And I am the last person to ever talk down on Kip, but that was one decommitment where I was really kind of surprised Georgia came in. Josh Miller, I think Josh Miller's a great player.
Awesome.
I think Penn State certainly wishes they could have kept Josh Miller. Yazid was kind of a situation where, they wanted him, but there was questions there about is he a natural receiver? Because Penn State there was a good part of Penn State's coaching, or we'll say recruiting staff, just everybody in Lash, who thought Yazid would be a better cornerback because just from a catching perspective, he just wasn't natural with it.
Yeah, he fought the ball in the air. That was one of the things that when we talked about him and when he committed, it was part of his profile. That's something he's got to work on. And but speed, man, everyone loves speed.
Of course.
Where we got here? RS has a question for you. He says, memory serves me right. Penn State will be over by 2 scholarships on the 85 scholarship limit. Do you project losing more to the portal with that in mind?
They always kind of have it where we've seen this in multiple years now, where they're expecting spring, somebody's going to leave, something's going to happen. I would expect 1 or 2 more outgoings. Yeah, I mean, they have to have 1 or 2 outgoings. Now, I think that number maybe still includes a walk-on, and they give walk-ons every year. Like Dominic DeLuca is going to have a scholarship there. That guy's earned it, but they might include 1 or 2 others who, when they give them those, it's certainly by semester. And obviously, they don't ever want to take it. The goal is just to have guys naturally leave and see where things go. But this is certainly not the first year where they've been 1 or 2 over. And it's just kind of natural. Somebody's going to leave after spring. Probably somebody else is going to leave in the summer. It's just how it works.
Yeah, and if you want an early look into how that might look during the spring practice schedule, I did a roster reset at defensive end, and first off, wow, Penn State is stacked at defensive end. I think this might be the best collection of talent they've had, if you include Abdul Carter, that I've seen at Penn State in terms of raw talent at the position and the potential for all these guys to play together at an elite level. But that also means coming up this spring, where does all that shake out? Does somebody get pushed down the depth chart? That's one area I'm looking at, so you can check that out, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. A great time to remind you, sign up at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. It is just $29.99 to get inside access and information, to get all of our reporting, to get Ryan's reporting and Sean's reporting and Nate's reporting on basketball, wrestling, everything for $29.99 all the way until next football season. And you get to the BWI message board. You can ask questions on the Mailbag Show as well, which is coming up this week. Last reminder, if you're listening on the podcast, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts with your question for the Mailbag Show. We'll get to that when we do the Mailbag Show. All right, so I want to talk about this quickly. One last comment on Phil Trautwein. Just super interesting. These trends seem to be very symmetrical. We talked about the other day the first commitment in a class, or one of the first commitments in the class, and poised to have the last commitment and the guy that they're going after in this signing day cycle in the second period, where it's really hyper targeted. And he potentially, if he lands Onoh, has landed 2 guys in really quick high pressure situations to form that relationship, to close and get a guy that you're targeting. So, from the on-field part to the recruiting part, he is doing an absolutely marvelous job. I want to take a quick break and talk about something that isn't Penn State football. You're an Eagles fan, right?
So I am, yes. I would say I'm an Eagles fan. That's a complicated question. I am certainly lean Philly. I wouldn't say I'm a diehard NFL fan of anyone in particular. Am I rooting for the Eagles? Have I been rooting for the Eagles through the playoffs? Yes. I'm more of a whatever team I bet on that day kind of fan, if I'm being honest with you. Okay. I don't, right. I like to dabble in a little NFL betting. So, but no, I'm certainly rooting for the Birds. I'm really happy for Miles Sanders. And man, this Super Bowl, I mean, you got Big Red going back, playing the Eagles. Yeah. Obviously, you got the Kelsey story there. And I just think, I think Cincinnati, I think Cincinnati's probably the best true team in the AFC. Although it sounds stupid to say, right? They just beat them.
Yeah.
You don't think so? Who do you think is the
their
best team in the AFC?
Their offensive line got too banged up. I think it's the Chiefs. I think that the best team did come out of here. What people don't realize is that they've invested a lot on defense, and Steve Spagnuolo is an awesome defensive coordinator who comes up with just the most annoying game plan to ruin your offense. And they dial it up in the playoffs. They do a great job, especially in big pressure situations. As a defensive coordinator, Steve Spagnuolo has been one of the best playoff coordinators. You go back to what he was doing with the Giants, beating Brady and that undefeated team. This is a really good team. And their offensive line, they've invested a lot of... One of the reasons they don't have Tyreek Hill anymore is because they invested so much in protecting Patrick Mahomes. So Orlando Brown, Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, that's a really good offensive line. And when you put all that together with Mahomes, they're thin at wide receiver right now, but they still have Travis Kelce. So these are the two best teams in the NFL talent-wise going up against each other. As much as, I have my own rooting opinions from an analysis standpoint, you couldn't get a better game. This is a stacked game.
I love this game. I can't wait. Hopefully nobody wants to commit or anything like that day. I'm trying to have everybody over. If I have to get a keg, I will. We're going to have an awesome time for this game. I cannot wait for it. But yeah, I'm pulling for the Eagles. I'm sure there's a lot of Eagles fans in here. I'm sure there's a lot of Steelers fans too. My wife's a Steelers fan. I grew up in a Cowboys house. I don't want to say that too loud. I'm not a Cowboys fan. That was the one thing. I love my dad to death. I'll do anything for him. I wasn't going to be a Cowboys fan. So, NFL to me is just, man, put Red Zone on and enjoy some awesome football. I'm definitely pulling for the Birds, though. But I can't pretend I'm a diehard fan. There's a lot of people probably watching this right now who are more diehard fans than me, and I don't want to pretend that I am match them.
That sounds like a healthier way to spend your Sundays after working 6 days covering Penn State football, to then not go into the high-pressure emotional situation of I have to have my team win or else I'm going to have, you ever hear of, there's actually a term for when your team loses. There's a psychological effect. It's like you lost. You then feel as if you have failed at something, which is like the whole thing about sports. That's the secret sauce. After the Bills lose, I promise you, if I am not the same person, and it's the worst way to live. It's the worst way to live.
I'm sure these people in the chat can relate, right? Hey, but Penn State had a good year though, so we're not looking at losses. It was a good year for them.
So let's take one last question about 2023 before we get to really the breakdown of the class. When do you put the thread to bed? When do you put the 2023 thread to bed for all those people who preview? This is where you get your information on the message board. Okay.
If you're watching, chime in. I want to see a comment. I think Fitz was watching earlier. I don't know if it's usually he's probably got bass and putting kids down and stuff now. But I would think another week or two probably. But we'll see. There's gonna be a little bit of discussion maybe after, but that's more of a question for Sean. That's a good. I don't know. I didn't think about that. Usually, we'll take it down off the sticky threads at the top, and if it comes back, it comes back. We'll see.
If you want to know what that means, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, the only place you're going to find out. So let's take our last look back at the class, kind of look at this class in specifics. So I want to give kind of the wide view, but should we do early enrollees first, or do you want to do kind of the review? Okay, so let's look at the class as a whole, just so people know what we're talking about. We mentioned the offensive line, and we gave you an idea of what we're working with here. So here is the On3 Penn State class, and one of the cool things at On3 specifically is that you'll get a comparison, as you can see here, with all the major sites. So if you're mad that Javen Williams isn't high enough in the On3 consensus, you can come in here and you can look at who you need to be mad at, or Alex Birchmeyer. But here's the class as it stands.
Except for when it's on 3 that he's lower in, except that. No, but anyway, go on.
Who stands out to you in terms of, I guess, the surprised you in this class? where you didn't see a rise coming or you didn't see something from that play where they turned out to be something more than you expected?
Oh, gosh. Zion Tracy certainly surprised me a little bit just because he went from this guy at camp that was shutting down Johnny Shakir and like, okay, it's a good performance, but Zion camped the year before and he had a good performance then, but he just seemed like to be on a different level this year. And what's hard, I guess, for me is St. Thomas More. Like I haven't seen a ton of new film, new games for.
There's
and
nothing.
Zion didn't even play. Like
He didn't
Zion
play
didn't
DB.
even play. Yeah, he didn't even. Well, he did play DB a whole lot. He did play DB a little bit against IMG and one or two other games. Like when they played elite talent, he played. And I got to give Charles Power a lot of credit for that stuff because like we talked about that when Zion committed, and like the guy actually like made sure to get the IMG game then to really kind of break it down. So I got to give him credit for that stuff. But Zion's rise, I mean, obviously he had some great testing numbers and things like that. But that was one where, you know, he went from like okay, this is going to be, you know, a solid 3-star addition, and then boom, like all of a sudden he's a top 300 guy. So that certainly stands out. I would say Chimney, if he commits, kind of fits that role too, just because we weren't talking about Chimney a whole lot. I mean, he's committed to Old Dominion just a few months ago, and you know now he's a 207 in the country, so that grabs my attention. I think are we talking about underrated guys still, or where we want to go with that? Because
we can go. Yeah, let's go there next. Yeah, let's go there next.
And hold on, the one, and I'm so stupid because I skipped over the one guy I did want to mention is I will say that James Franklin, when we were doing that press conference, who was the one guy he brought up, T. Frank? It was Tyreek Blanding. He's like, I don't know why any of you guys aren't talking about Tyreek Blanding. I put on this guy's film, and I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what am I not? This guy's great. So Tyreek was another situation where there was just limited film. I think Christ the King went like 0-10 this year or something like that. Like they didn't have a great year. So yeah, he might be a guy we're end up sleeping on down the road. I would say guys who are underrated or guys that I think can outdo their rating. Certainly, if Penn State didn't have Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, like I really like Cameron Wallace and all the different things that he does. Just different ways he's shown his athleticism. Do
you think he could be that third back next year? Do you think he can fit into that role and at play as a freshman? Because they do need a third back.
Yeah, it's so hard for me to say. And the only reason I say that is just because the one thing that would concern me, I guess, is just like the level of competition he plays. And like, don't worry, like Georgia's single A is, I don't know, probably like 3 or 4A here. So that, I mean, and that kind of goes against what I'm saying, but like he was playing like just very, very small schools out there. So will this be a jump that he's not quite ready for? I think he would be a great player that will stack up and maybe contribute on special teams and stuff like that. But I also think like Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, dude, like they are, I could see them trying to do, like remember when Saquon had his year and like they were just pounding Saquon to try and like up the stats. Like I can see that kind of a year coming up for, especially because you have two of them, right? So, but like Cam brings some different qualities too. Like I could see Cam helping, maybe in some different ways. But I feel like they're going to try and rack up those stats and build Nick and Katron's national claim to a different level this year.
Somebody asked me about the running back position the other day. And they were like, well, what about a transfer running back? And you know how this has been a conversation all off season. And I got to the point, Ryan, I just thought about it this way. If Penn State is playing their transfer running back, the season's not going the way you want it to anyway.
Yes.
Like, you're not bringing in a guy who's going to like, okay, so Nick and Katron are injured, but don't worry, we got X, and that's going to definitely do it for you. Like, if that happens, that's just a thing you've got to accept here for 2023 is that these guys are special and important. And if they get injured, they get injured. And that's going to be a part of the story. Do you have a follow-up there? I heard
I was one thing I would just say is like Elliot Washington came on campus and like has tested really well and really impressed the staff so far.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah, so I want to make sure he gets his due. He's one of those guys who, like, obviously 4-star guy. Penn State expected him to do well, but I think like the way he's tested and his early maturity and things like that, the staff, excuse me. And Alex Birchmeyer, like Alex is already incredibly gifted and all those things, but he came onto campus and I don't want to say exceeded expectations because we really thought he would be great, but just in everything from his weightlifting to his shuttle times to all these different little things, He's really done a great job. So I just want to make sure those guys get the credit that they're getting from people inside Lash right now, because people are really excited about those two and what they've seen so far. And I can say the same thing about Tony Rojas and a couple other guys too, but just from my talks with people, that those two have seemed to be the most spoken about.
Matthew Paludi says Jameel Lyons needs some love. I
love Jameel Lyons.
What do you think?
Dude, that's what happens when you sign a great class like this. I mean, I know it wasn't top 10 and stuff like last year, but there's a lot of guys. I mean, Jameel Lyons, man, I went and saw him play Wilson, and it was the funniest game because that first quarter, I mean, Wilson was doing really well, and I was like, man, is Roman gonna kind of get pushed over here by Wilson? Wilson's a great program, but they were down a little bit when it comes to what I would consider some of their other teams in previous years. And man, Jameel, I don't want to say Jameel's the one that took over that game, because they've had a few others who stepped up as well. But from from a defensive line perspective, it felt like he just kind of flipped the switch a little bit. And I think he had, I don't know, it was something around 8-9 tackles, bunch of tackles for loss, a couple sacks. I mean, he really stepped it up in that second quarter. And then on the offense, of course, they fired it up. But no, I love Jameel Lyons. I mean, I feel like Jameel will need a year, but I can say that about the vast majority of defensive linemen.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's kind of my assessment. Why I haven't been a little more hesitant about him, because you see the raw physical tools. I mean, his fluidity and his length with his size is awesome, and maybe he's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's not slow. It's just there's a lot of things in his technique that I don't want to pump him up too much, because then you've always got the worry of, okay, then he doesn't play right away. I just talked about how deep defensive end is. You don't want to set up my whole thing has always been the wet blanket of don't set false expectations for these guys. But Jameel Lyons, as far as talent and ceiling, he's up there in this class. It's just there's a lot, I think, from a technical standpoint I want to see too.
Setting false expectations is what this job is all about, buddy. Come on, it took you 2 years to learn that?
You need a foil.
We try not to do it. It's one of those jobs, though, where they're all teenagers, right? And, we're rating them as 4 stars and 3 stars and things like that. But they're all great players. And I've learned over the years that, if you just lean too much on those 4-star guys and you kind of push off some of the guys you're rated lower, you're going to look stupid in the end. So I feel I'm not trying to over talk and, pump up too many guys too much. But I've just seen so many examples of, you can't sleep on any of these guys. And it's a hard business, too, from the perspective. I'm not trying to, pat ourselves on the back or anything. But, there are tens of thousands of guys out there. Guys are going to fall through the cracks. I mean, at 1-3 specifically, I mean, we're still, 1/3 of the size is 24/7 in some of those sites, So just trying to thoroughly scout everybody and do all those things, it's a difficult task to do. I think I genuinely not trying to kiss ass here, but I think our staff's done a great job with it, and as you have as well, T. Frank. But you're just looking at tens of thousands of players in a class.
One of the reasons I'm sitting here doing this show and why I do what I do is because I always have a hard time trusting other people, given the industry as a whole. But Charles Power specifically, every time he and I have a conversation, or every time I hear something he said about a Penn State prospect that I've reviewed, and it's like, I agree. I don't feel like there's any politicking or any BS, or there's not a lot of. He says what's true and he doesn't embellish anything. So I feel like if you're interested in knowing the truth about these guys, On3's rankings are about as close as you can get to what we can actually know about these prospects, and he does an amazing job. Part of his work here is finish up your thought there. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just cut you off. Just for someone who's worked at Rivals, someone who has friends at 24/7, everybody's trying to do their best with that. I don't want to come off as people are playing favorites with guys and pushing people up. That's one thing that always upsets me when I see people on Twitter you're just friendly with this kid or this coach and that's why he's pushed up. That's really at 0-3, for example, our scouting staff is completely separate from what I consider myself, which is recruiting and journalism. They purposely keep us separated to make sure that my opinions, just because I've become really close with Tony Rojas, which Tony's a bad example there because Tony doesn't talk to anybody, but somebody else will say, they don't influence things too much. But we got a lot more to talk about. I don't want to bore people with that stuff, but I do like how they separate us. Obviously I talked to Charles, but there's no hey man, you need to look at this guy more because I think he's a good player. Charles is yeah, I'll handle it, dude. Go do your job.
this is the On3 hour. I just want everyone at On3 headquarters to know that we've done a great job promoting the site. Here we are with the team rankings. This is why I have this screen up here, is because tomorrow, if Penn State lands Chimdy Onoh, they are here with 14 four-star players. If they get 15, that's a pretty good number. That gets us into the conversation you and I have had before of borderline top 10 class, depending on how the 5 stars and everything else shakes out. So do you think Penn State, if they move anywhere? And I just realized I'm covering it up here. Can they move anywhere here at a 13th? And how do you see this shaking out tomorrow?
So the issue I think we'll see is USC at 14. They only have 20 commitments right now, and USC is expected to get a couple guys tomorrow. So I could see that 91. Oh, by the way, Penn State's number, guys. Some of you guys are gonna like this. Penn State's number right now is 91,409. Hey, everybody out there, 409. But anyway, 91,374 is USC's number. So they're right on Penn State's tail. I mean, Penn State. I think USC is going to add a couple players tomorrow, probably jump ahead of Penn State. So even if Penn State does bump up a little bit and get closer to Tennessee there, I could see USC passing both of them, which is why PSU will probably stay in that 13 range. But, I mean, I was pushing all year, man. You get the 15 4-stars, you have a legit chance at a top 10 class. I just think when you look at the top 10, though, I mean, there's a lot of examples of classes programs going above and beyond than what we've seen in previous years. You got Oklahoma getting 3 5-stars and 12 4-stars. You got Notre Dame with 19 4-stars. You got Oregon with 16. You got Clemson with 16. It was a really good year for the school to the top, which I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the big year that NIL came into play, and that's kind of impacting some things. So not that we don't see that in other years, but I do think it's a situation where the rich are going to get richer here. Or if your school maybe isn't rich on the field, you're rich off the field, so you're going to look rich in recruiting rankings, which is that team up there in number 6 right now. Yes, I took a shot at Miami.
So it's this is kind of where everything is right now. We'll keep you updated at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Nate Bauer will have his article of where things shake out. I know he loves that particular article. We were talking about that earlier today. So you can see where all that lands tomorrow on the site if they do end up getting Chimdy Onoh. And, of course, where everything else lands, because that's part of the conversation. Last thing here is I want to get to looking forward as much as we can with this class. We've mentioned a couple of these guys. You've talked about a couple of them, but I wanted to give everybody who maybe doesn't know, these are the early enrollees that are on campus right now. I left off Zion Tracy because he wasn't a high school-specific prospect, so that's my bad. But Mega Barnwell, Alex Birchmeyer, Anthony Donko, Lamont Payne, Tony Rojas, Joey Schlaffer, Jackson Smolik, Elliot Washington, Javen Williams, and Tamir Robinson. So is this a good representation of a class in terms of early enrollees? Is this above or below where Penn State has been in the past?
Pretty much about on average. The only year, I think pretty much in every year, I think over the last 3-4 years, except for the COVID year, they had somewhere around 10 to 11. I think we've seen 12 or 13 at one point. The COVID year, I think, was 7. So that was down a little bit. And there was obviously many, many reasons for that. So, yeah, it's about average. I think it's Alabama. Alabama has only 4 or 5 guys who haven't signed yet. I'm sure you guys can pull that up there. I was looking the other day at just some of the top classes out there, and I think Alabama has almost 3/4 of their class enrolling early. So this is a big deal. This is becoming more of an emphasis everywhere. I think what will be interesting with this is the All-Star games, the Under Armour game, the All-American Bowl. More and more schools are kind of saying wink, wink, nudge, nudge, maybe you shouldn't do this. You should, don't risk injury. And also they usually overlap when schools are starting up. For example, Penn State, I know, is the All-American Bowl. And then I went down the All-American Bowl 2 years ago. Drew Aller plays in it. Drew Aller flies to Cleveland and then drives to State College all 24 hours after he played in that game. So I'll just be curious to see the impact as this grows and grows and grows. And I know it's been around for 10 years now, but it's just, no one's losing numbers. They're just growing every year. How will that maybe impact those All-Star games moving forward?
Who on this list to you, and I'll put it back up here, who on this list to you stands to benefit the most from being here this winter?
Ooh, You're so hard with these damn questions you don't give me before. I'm teasing. I mean, I think Birchmeier is one of the few offensive linemen who like could legitimately maybe get into the rotation. And I'm not. If you asked me that 2 months ago, I didn't think that. I just think that from talking to people and how impressed they've been. And don't get me wrong, I was impressed with Javen 2 months ago. I want to clarify that, but I just think he's really, really, really impressed here in recent weeks. So, I mean, Tony Rojas probably benefits a good bit because he needs to add weight. He has all the athleticism, all the different things, getting there at spring practice, adding the weight, but also just getting into that rotation where there's like good linebackers at Penn State, but they still need a little more depth there. So I think that helps Tony. I would say Elliott Washington just because of how much he's impressed people, but they're also pretty deep at corner. So we'll see with that.
Here's an interesting thing. I agree with you, but I'm still on the train of they were trying to get Daniel Harris because he's a good football player, right? I don't want to make it about one thing. He's obviously a quality prospect, but he has that length, right? He has that length and he has that ability to play the position from a physical standpoint. They go out and they target Storm Duck, who is a physical 6 foot, 200-pound guy who doesn't have the speed of some of the other guys that they've recruited, but he has that boundary corner ability. Elliott Washington is stacked. Like one of my favorite things to watch was him just run on film because he's got great speed. And I think if you give him the opportunity, he can shove some guys around and play against physical bodied receivers. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, I think there's a role for him. But at the same time, Johnny Dixon and Kalen King, they're not going to be, I don't know they're going to be sharing the same spot anymore next year. So I guess there's just a world in which I could see Elliott Washington cracking because of his skills, cracking into the depth chart.
No, I agree. I'm just looking at Duck and Kalen, of course, and Dixon. Yeah. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, certainly. I mean, he's really impressed everybody so far. I mean, again, I said earlier, Birchmeier and Elliott have probably been the two that people are talking about the most.
I think the other guy I want to point out here is the guy that I highlighted on the graphic, which is Tamir Robinson. Mm-hmm. After not playing and being, rehabbing his injury, I think it'll be good for him to get in the weight room and to be around the atmosphere of football again. I can't imagine that was easy for him over the last, however long that was since his injury.
It was October 2021. So, I mean, he's missed for almost 2 years. I think he played like 4 or 5 games his junior season. So, I mean, he's missed about 1.5 seasons. Yeah. So, I mean, he's been cleared for a little while now. So, but I totally agree with you on that. And I actually, when you put that list up, I was thinking about mentioning him. I totally agree. Just having him get in spring ball.
Yep.
In a setting where it's not as heightened and, you got to be on your game every week because you got a game here in 4 days. I think it's a great setting for him to get the juices flowing again and get back into the mix. But, I mean, Tamir's going to need time coming back from that injury, no doubt about it. But definitely getting spring ball reps, getting those, whatever it is, 15-plus practices, I think will really help him.
Yeah, and just getting into the flow of football again, I think that'll be really good for him.
I feel for Tamir, man, because Tamir, I mean, when it comes to ratings and all that stuff, I have people ask all the time, how does Tamir go from here to here? And it's just, man, when you're comparing him to all these other players, and you don't have film for a year and a half. It's just it's hard not to drop guys when you're seeing progression nationally from so many others. Because that, we were talking about how earlier Charles and us are separated, but that's one guy we've talked about is. Charles didn't want to drop Tamir at all, but there's so many guys all over the place who are just showing this progression, showing their strengths and weaknesses in different spots where it's just I don't have a choice. I have to. So
yeah,
I feel for Tamir a little bit because I think he's kind of gone under the radar, especially with Tony Rojas's emergence and obviously getting Kavion Keys at the end. Hopefully he'll prove everybody wrong and end up crushing it.
We have a couple questions here that we're going to round out the show with. And first, we're going to start with a statement. The bearded one himself, Michael McCollin, says, "I'm here for the quality, personalities, and the growing community." Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you,
Appreciate
Michael.
You.
Yeah, he's a new regular. I love it when we got new regulars. And I'm going to say a quick piece here before we get to the last couple questions. This has been a record-breaking January for Blue White Illustrated, for the podcast, for the YouTube show, and I want to thank everybody who's been here. We're getting into February. We're going to find out who the true grinders are. I'll be here. So if you guys want to show up with me, we'll be talking about football theory.
I'll be here.
No, you need some time off, my guy. You need some time off.
Give me 2 weeks. We'll talk third week or so. I'm definitely taking the next 2 weeks and chilling a little bit. But go ahead. I apologize for cutting you off.
No, it's just, but that's what we're doing here. Is we're building a show, we're building a relationship with people, and I love this. Like, I never wanted specifically in my life to get into radio. That's where I started, though. And I just love the ability to create connections with people and to talk about football. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And this ability to do this, and the people that have responded to it. I mean, we did more than double what we did this time last year in terms of engagement and people listening to the show. So thank you. I know I said this after the Rose Bowl game, but it's been another, like, football's been over for a month, and we still have the same number of people showing up every day. I love that, and it's because of people like all of our regulars. I'm going to leave people out. Mike has always been here. Michael, Steven, all the guys who have been here on a regular basis. Jason, who always gives a thumbs up to every video. Appreciate all of you guys.
You need to take a page from Franklin. Franklin always says this in his press conference. Oh, I can't name everybody. I'm going to forget somebody. You got to take that page from James, man. James has taught us that. You can't name names because then you're going to forget somebody. But then he does.
So. Here's the thing then he does.
But I do respect him for that, though, because he's in a tough spot there. You got 85 guys. You're talking about a position group. Yeah. And, sure, he'll think of three, and then, there's always a fourth that's doing well and not getting the credit, especially when, they're younger guys emerging. Like, that matters, man. That matters to those guys when they're not getting on the field, but they're grinding in practice.
A couple questions here, and, of course, it's going to say we have talked about this class in I think, good terms, and it hasn't been perfect. So Mark brings up one question. Where are all the 4-star defensive linemen? We mentioned, hey, don't forget about Tyreek Blanding, a 3-star. But defensive tackle is one area you could say is a miss in this class and has been a common theme. So that coupled with Lambda's question, another regular here, does Barnwell eventually end up at defensive tackle? Do you believe he'll stay at tight end? Or is he at another position on the on the line of scrimmage?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question. The defensive linemen, the quality defensive linemen, they're all down south. Honest to God, that's one of the biggest issues for Penn State right now. Let's just go through the top 10 here for on 3. David Hicks, Texas. Peter Woods, Alabama. James Smith, Alabama. Jordan Hall, Florida. Mateo Ugalele, I know I butchered it, but California.
I put myself on screen while you were talking. I'm just sorry.
Oh, I did notice that, but I wasn't going to call you out. But my point is just like the elite defensive linemen are always down south. I mean, I can name more. You got Reuben Bain, Florida. You got Devin Hobbs. Hobbs was somebody they actually were in the mix a little bit. Goes to Tennessee. Tennessee's incredibly aggressive with NIL right now, so I understand that. I mean, Jason Moore from DeMatha was their best bet at a premier defensive tackle. Of course, he ends up at Ohio State. Larry Johnson, I think most Penn State fans should. Obviously, you're upset he goes to Ohio State, but I think you need to. I think most of you guys respect what Larry Johnson's done in his career to understand that to some degree. But I mean, just even if you go from 10 to 11, you got Kedrick Falk, Alabama. You got Jordan Renaud, Texas. I mean, I'll just roll through them. Georgia, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Florida, Missouri, Alabama, Georgia, and then you go to Brennan Vernon from Ohio, who's number 20. I mean, they are. So this is going to be a hard position for Penn State to recruit because all the best guys are in areas where all the top schools are not only recruiting, but they're throwing money around that Penn State, and again, not just Penn State, but most of the Big Ten schools aren't getting in that game yet. So I agree with you. I understand that position. I've said multiple times. I think defensive tackle is one of the few spots that's a difference maker, a spot that Penn State really needs. But man, there's just not a lot of guys in this area that they can really push for. And then when you're recruiting out of your area and you're recruiting against half those guys I think I named are from Georgia or Florida, it's I don't even know. It's just a hard proposition,
especially when Florida is under Billy Napier seems to be going in the right direction on the recruiting trail at the very least. So
and
contending with one of the major.
Jalen Rashada's $13 million contract, and who knows? I mean, they were doing great there. No, they were, but my point with that is I'd be really curious to see how Florida responds from that Jaden Rashada fiasco. Which, by the way, Penn State. There was one point where Penn State had a shot with Jaden Rashada, and I've talked about this people on our message board. And Penn State moved on from Jaden Rashada, and boy, does that look good right about now, because I think there was clearly, it wasn't about skill. There was other things going on there that they did not like.
This is another point that I think is interesting that we didn't mention. We talked about some of these players. I'm going to throw in Dakari Nelson as another guy that's one of my favorites in this class. Time for Penne Really, I'm assuming he's a fan of pasta. Penn State hanging on to elite recruits in the South in this class, combined with not letting regional guys get away, is impressive. How do you feel like the team in the staff, I should say, in this particular cycle was able to get work done in the South? They didn't get everybody they wanted. Derek LeBlanc, as you mentioned, one of the guys that got away. And they didn't get everybody in the region, but they were able to hang on to a lot of the guys in Virginia and down south. How do you view that as a step forward or just a this cycle, these players sort of thing?
So I will answer that in a second. I apologize. I did forget to answer Lambda's question about where Barnwell will end up, and I want to make sure we try and get all of them. I do think that's I think that Penn State wants him to be an offensive tackle. I don't think Matthias has that in his head that he wants. I think he wants to play every position but offensive tackle. Yeah. So we'll see where it comes out this spring because I think this spring I don't want to say reality check, but it should maybe he should see a little bit that he's going. He won't be going against Trautwein yet, but the tight end room that they have there, it's just kind of a different level of athleticism. And I think Matthias Barnwell could be a great player. I don't want to talk down on him. I just think that that body shape is perfect for offensive tackle. That's where Penn State wants him.
He hasn't embraced that he's a big man. He wants to be an athlete, but here's the thing: and this is I've said this since he was a 9th grader. You know how much offensive tackles make in the NFL? I get it. Listen, as a short, stocky dude, I always wanted to be an athlete too. I had to accept at a certain point. Ryan gets it. All of the dudes that are not the tall, slender,
all the sports
athletic
journalists
dudes.
In the world, that's all of us.
Exactly. and so I totally get it. But at the same time, he has rare skills, and if he can realize that, he can. You don't it's a good career move is I guess what I would impress upon him, which I think is what you're trying to say as well.
Yes. Yeah. I think Penn State prefers that. The defensive tackle talk was kind of a meet me in the middle kind of thing, I think. And we'll see. Maybe defensive tackle will be there. But I think if you got to poll Penn State's coaches and their recruiting staff, I think the vast majority of them would lean on offensive tackle. So to go to the other question then, I would just note that they found Penn State guys down south. Like Dakari Nelson fits Penn State. King Mack is someone I really wish I could get to know more. But from talking to everybody, because King just doesn't into the interviews, and I get it. It gets annoying after a while. But these are guys that just care about the things that Penn State people care about. When it comes to not just academics is always part of it, but just money and the influences of NIL and that stuff. It's not just about that. It's about getting on the field and proving yourself and all the things I think Penn State fans care about. So that was the big thing to me. I think when you look at those Southern guys and how they pulled in, because as I got to know them more, I know I sound like patting myself on the back here, but Conrad was the only one that never really I got that mold from, and I only got to talk to Conrad a couple times. When I talked to Conrad and I talked to King, they're different, and I could definitely get the vibe that King fit Penn State more just by the way they talked, the way the things he cared about. Conrad brought up NIL with me before and stuff, and just when I get that from guys, it just maybe this won't work out, and it didn't work out for Conrad. So that's just interesting to me. But look, a Rose Bowl, a 10-2 season when it comes to pulling in and holding on to all these guys, winning matters too, and that had a massive part in it. Sure, they lost to Ohio State, they lost to Michigan. Of course, that Ohio State game was incredibly close, and I think a lot of guys were on campus to see that up close as well. And I mean, how many times have we seen that Ohio State Penn State game, especially at Beaver Stadium, really seem a lot closer than maybe what the final score showed you? And Penn State's able to use that well and say, hey, man, you're the missing piece to get us over that line. So I think that had a lot to do with it, just winning. And then from those guys who were outside the region, guys who really fit Penn State and understand what Penn State's culture is about.
Ryan, I've been having so much fun. I forgot to check the clock. We're overtime, so you get paid overtime, which is another beer, I think. So thank you.
It's all quiet upstairs now. It was not quiet earlier, so maybe my kids are to bed, and I can enjoy another beer. But most likely, I'll have to finish that up. But appreciate everybody, guys. I had a lot of fun these last couple of weeks. I'm gonna try and enjoy the dead period because February is the only real dead period now. The July dead period is where everybody commits, and then the August dead period is obviously when spring practice or preseason practice starting. So we're going to try and enjoy the only slow time. I'm going to take my kids out to some children's museums and do some fun things these next weekend. But I promise towards the end of the month, T. Frank, we'll do a good show.
Yeah, we got some fun things planned. Like I got some fun ideas that we're trying to execute that we'll let you know when they happen. So stick around, bluewhiteillustrated.com. Of course, like I said before, like the video. And again, thanks for always being here. We will be back tomorrow. We'll talk to you then.